Welcome back, brothers and sisters. Let us open with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, again I want to thank you that we can come before you and open your word. And I want to pray, Lord, that you would help us, because we can do nothing of ourselves, but you've promised that if we ask, we shall receive, and that you would come and unfold your word to us. Help us, therefore, to have a teachable spirit like a little child, and help our minds to be open and remember that your thoughts are not our thoughts. So let us be ready to be instructed and to allow your word to teach us, so that we can see these wondrous things out of thy law. So please bless me now, Lord, and help me. And I ask and pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay, so welcome back to everyone that's been following. And in our last presentation, we were looking at Matthew 24, and I was going through these two phases of Matthew 24 verses 6 and then followed by verse 7, and trying to help us understand that it's representing two different phases, because the Matthew 24 is illustrating a delineation of events that come in their order, right? Now, we're to study line upon line. All the prophets are speaking about the end of the world, and therefore to understand these things and confirm these things, we need to bring many stories together, bringing them line upon line, and they will just confirm whether or not something that we've understood is correct or not, because the prophets are subject unto the prophets, therefore they're all in agreement. And if all the prophets are speaking about the end of the world, then as we bring these things together, the words that are written there in the Bible will agree, they will confirm each other, because the prophets are subject to one another, they're all in agreement. Okay, and that's what we're doing here. We're just building a structure, right? So just like Moses was instructed to build the temple, right? The building of that temple, everything was an allegory, everything was symbolic, and that's what we are doing here. All these stories, all these past histories, they were all symbolic of things that were going to happen at the end of the world. So we're just going to continue to build. So what I've done here on the board is I've just extended the lines, because I was alluding to the fact that in the time of trouble, or the time of trouble, it is prefiguring the 7 last plagues, right? Now, I have to yet really prove that, but in our last presentation, we pulled up some quotes, and where Sister White was alluding to the fact that there were plagues coming upon the earth, right? I can't remember exactly which quotes that I used now, but there was some in there that was alluding to the fact that there are plagues pouring out here. But I will confirm that, okay? And what I want us to see is that we have this time of trouble, right? We've looked at, and then there's a time of peace, okay? When Christ was baptized, the dove of peace came down. And then there was a time of trouble, okay? And we're trying to show that this time of trouble just prefigures this time of trouble, because it's going to repeat. And this is what past histories are showing us in the Bible, right? So John is standing there. That which has been is that which shall be, right? He's showing the past, the present, and the future. And all these principles are being illustrated in Bible prophecy and played out at the end of the world in this time of trouble. And this time of trouble is illustrated by the statue in Daniel 2. The head of gold, arms and body of silver, the brass waist, and then finally the 7 last plagues. And we will come on to the 7 last plagues in later studies, right? But those 7 last plagues are being prefigured in these time of troubles, right? And we will come on to it, and I'll show how the 7 last plagues fit into here and what they illustrate, okay? But what all I've done is I've extended it, because I want us to see that you have a time of trouble, time of peace, 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 time of trouble, right? And these are all fractals, right? And a fractal is just when you have a hole and you take a piece of that hole and you lay it underneath and extend it, and it shows you the same pattern as the larger version, and then you can do the same again and again, right? And nature shows us these things, right? And nature is to teach us, right? And our God is the God of nature. So everything that's in nature are lessons. Christ learned these things from nature, okay? So nature teaches us these repeating patterns at different levels. And we will see that in the Bible, when you lay all these things out, you bring them underneath, you have these perfect repeating patterns, same structure over and over again, proving to us, right, that just from God's word, it's the God of nature that has brought these things together. The Lord, using prophecy, is proving that He is God, right, and His thoughts are far above our thoughts. But not only that, He puts His own signature upon His word, and we will see that through these 66 books here in the Bible that they are not of man's devising. Man's hand may have placed those words there, but it was the work of a higher being, through the Holy Spirit, that these things were brought together, right? And we will begin to see something that it's absolutely impossible for human beings to devise and bring together. And therefore the Bible is evidence of itself, right? It will prove itself. It will prove every false and evil way on this earth just from the Bible. And this is why we are to be students of prophecy and understand these things. Okay, so we finished, right? So we basically had, right, we're marking this point. Let's use this one because Christ comes to the end here, or he's here, but he's pointing forward to this time. Same as John. John sees that was past, okay, and then it gets the deadly wound, and then the deadly wound's healed, okay, and it's going to repeat. So we were looking at how this is Matthew 24 verses, I think, just let's turn in our Bibles back to Matthew 24. Just want to make sure that I incorporate all the right verses here. But I think it's 2 to... yeah, well, okay, let's go from 1 down to 6, right? So Matthew 24, verses 1 to 6. Christ is pointing forward to this time when many false prophets would rise up and deceive many, and he explained that it's marking this time in verse 6. It says, and ye shall hear of wars and rumours of wars. And this is what was taking place in here. He says, but the end is not yet. Because it comes to the next point, verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. And we were dealing with this power now, right? This globalistic power. Here you have the north, and here you have the south that came against the north, marking this point here, right? And brings it to an end, right? Or doesn't bring the power to an end, because these two powers are there all the time, but it just marks a point where this power then comes into the ascendancy. But then there comes a point where this power is going to now lift itself up like this power did, right? And it will go through this phase until it becomes the lower one, and the north then rises up again here, and then he's going to lift himself up and so on, right? And this is this war between the north and south, these two powers always seeking for the ascendancy. The northern power being the elected power, being the emperor, but this other power, right, within the empire has great support, right, and through its policies, right, which is opposite to the policies of this, it gains the ascendancy, right, and this is This is what this prophecy is trying to teach us about these two powers in the earth, the left and the right, north and south, that are vying for people's support and attention, and they are both trying to enslave everybody and both trying to deceive everybody. Okay? And we really need to understand exactly about this. But this is a false religious power, and this one is an atheistic or a humanistic power, right? The globalist power. Okay, and that's what we were looking at, right? So it brought us down, and this was Matthew 24 and verse 7, and then brings us to that point, right? So it brings us again to a time of peace. Now I will bring many evidences to prove these things, right? But the easiest way to do this for me to lay it out, and then we can build it and lay on top as we go along. So don't be dismayed if there's some things you don't understand there, or I haven't proved any specific point. We will come to that, but we can only do one thing at a time. Okay, so when you get to verse 8, it just Christ now reiterates the point. He says, all these, right? All these things that happen from here to here are the beginning of sorrows, right? So let's just remind ourselves. If we go to Genesis 3 in verse 15, here was the promise that was given in the beginning when Adam fell, right? It says, and I will put enmity between between thee and the woman, okay, between Satan and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. So there's these two seeds. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So these two seeds, one seed is God's people that hold on to the truth. The other seed is Satan's seed, right? And Satan's seed is divided into these two camps because he's trying to deceive everybody, and he's using these two thought processes to deceive people, to make one group, or at least to make the whole world believe that this power here is the correct power, because they will see that this one is so terrible that they will think, no, that this must be correct, and this one's going to do these great miracles, bringing fire down from heaven, and deceive the whole world, right? And they will believe that this is Christ, but it's Antichrist. Okay, so, and in verse 16 in Genesis 3, it says, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. Now remember, we looked at this because right at the end, right here, you have this 3 days where Jonah came out of the belly. And this is also marking where Christ comes out of the belly and gets baptized, right? And I was showing this, how this also represents this, right? It just gets repeated. Okay? So, and Christ says here, right? When you get here, just let's mark that. It says, excuse me. It says it's the beginning of sorrows. Okay, so this here, when it begins here, this is the beginning of sorrows. These two phases, right? So it says here, when you get the end is not yet, for then this has to happen. And then he says, all these are the beginning of sorrows, right? So it's not brought to the birth yet, right? The birth, as we can see, is right down at the end. But there's many other things that we have to understand from this. But that's just what I want you to see, right? So there's this beginning of sorrows, but then there's this prophecy speaking about this belly experience here when she's brought forth, right? So you can see that it's a process that God's people are going through in order to reach this final birth at the end, right? And this is what we're going to come see very clearly from the Bible. Now, if we go to John chapter 16 and verse 19, it also speaks about this sorrow, right? Now, it says in verse 19, now Jesus knew that they were desirous to ask him, and he said unto them, do ye inquire among yourselves of that I said, a little while, and ye shall not see me, and again a little while, and ye shall see me, right? So it's speaking about 2 little whiles, and in between those 2 little whiles, right, they wouldn't see him. Okay, excuse me. In those, yes, that there was in a little while they wouldn't see him, and then after the second little while they would see him again, right? So this is what I want us to see, right? And Christ is trying to mark out something for us, right? In verse 20, it says, verily, verily, I say unto you that ye shall weep and lament, but the world shall rejoice, and ye shall be sorrowful, but your sorrow shall be turned into joy. A woman, when she is in travail, hath sorrow, because her hour is come. But as soon as she is delivered of the child, she remembereth no more the anguish for joy that a man is born into the world. And ye now therefore have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart shall rejoice, and your joy no man taketh from you. Now it's very simple. Christ is speaking about the cross, right? So there's 2 little whiles. Okay, so he went to the cross, right? And now marking the cross here, and I'll explain why the cross is there in further studies, right? But he went to the cross, and then there was this short period, and then he went into the grave for these 3 days, right? So this is the point where they didn't see him anymore, right? So what I want you to understand, right, is here we have a little while. Because there was a time that was about to come upon them, and he's marking it here. Christ understood the prophecy. Everything he said, he was taken from the Old Testament, right? So he said, in a little while, you won't see me. And then, in a little while, then ye shall see me again, right? So, in a little while. Because after 3 days, he resurrected. Those 3 days, they couldn't see him, he was in the grave. But after 3 days, went to his Father, came down, he was resurrected, and they saw him again. And now their joy was full, right? Now, maybe I go here now and give you a little taste of this one. If you just go to Revelation 11, because I don't want to put things in place that you can't understand. But if you just go from this parable that he's illustrating to them here, right? Because remember, Christ only spoke in parables, and that's what he was giving them, figurative language from the Old Testament, but also speaking about his experience. Because he said here in John 16, verse 20, when they don't see him, that's when he goes to the cross, it says, verily, verily, I say unto you, that ye shall weep and lament, but the world shall rejoice, right? So when Christ went to the cross, everybody was happy that they had been crucified, right? He had been crucified, but the disciples were, for them, it was the greatest disappointment because they thought that this was the Messiah, and they had this wrong concepts, right? But anyway, when you go to Revelation 11, right? Now, in Revelation 11, what I will prove, right, is speaking about this time period, right? And specifically this time period here. And it begins, it says, verse 1, there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood saying, rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar and them that worship therein. And a measuring is when God's people are being tested, right? So it says, but the court which is without the temple leave out and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city they shall tread under foot 42 months. Right? So it's a time period here given to where the Gentiles are going to tread down God's people. Right? Now, just so you can see the relation to this, because we're studying Matthew 24, right? And if you go to Luke 21, which is the parallel to Matthew 24, right? And Luke 21, it uses the same language, right? Verse 23. But woe unto them that are with suck, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. And we'll talk about that point in a moment. So this time of great distress. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So in this time of great distress, Jerusalem is going to be trodden down. So when you go back to Revelation 11, verse 2, but the court which is without the temple leave out and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months, which is 1260, right? We're going to look at this period in a moment. So Revelation 11 is in direct relation to what we're talking about here. And I'll show that this time of distress is beginning here, right? So when you just jump down, if we go to verse 7, right? Now it's speaking about the two witnesses here, right? It says, and when they shall have finished their testimony. So in this time period, they're giving a testimony. The beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them, and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So it takes you to the point of the cross, right here, right? So, now what happened, right? And it says, and they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice. Right? That's what Christ mentioned in John 16:20. We can just compare it, right? Because in John 16:20 he says, verily, verily, I say to you, that ye shall weep and lament, but the world shall rejoice. And ye shall be sorrowful, but your sorrow shall be turned into joy once this birth takes place, right? So, it says, and they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. Right? Okay, so I'm not going to go too much more into that. That's a prophecy we can look at later, but it's something that also illustrates this time period. Right? Bible is explaining itself. You've got to allow the language of the Bible to put things in the right place. So the point is I want you to see is that in John 16, right, you can see the language in John 16 is the same as what's written in Revelation 11. And the language in Revelation 11 is the same as in Luke 21. And Luke 21 is Matthew 24, right? So that's what you've got to do. You've got to bring them all together. So it's all speaking about the same thing, right? So right here at the cross, there's going to be great sorrow, but that sorrow is going to change. It's going to be turned into joy. And we need to understand all these things, what they mean, right? Okay, so when we go back now to the notes, if we go to Job 24, so we're looking at this little while, right? Job 24, verse 13, it says, they are of those that rebel against the light. They know not the ways thereof, nor abide in the paths thereof. The murderer, rising with the light, killeth the poor and needy, and the night is as a thief. So it's speaking about a time here where there are people that reject the light and they rise up and murder the righteous, right? This is what Job is referring to. And if you just jump down to verse 24, he speaks about them. He says, these murderers, are exalted for a little while, but are gone and brought low. They are taken out of the way as all other, and cut off as the tops of the ears of corn. So it's the language of the harvest, right? So there's a little while where these evil people who are murderers, right, are exalted, but it's going to come to a point where the harvest will come and the tops of the ears will be chopped off, okay? So just keep those thoughts in mind. Now go to Psalm 37, verses 9 and 10. It says, "For evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall not be. Yea, thou shalt diligently consider his place, and it shall not be." Okay, so the wicked, they're going to exalt themselves for a little while, and then they're going to get punished, right? So what I want us to see, right, is that there is a punishment here, and there is a punishment here, right? This is the destruction of Jerusalem. This is the destruction of Babylon. It's always at the end of a little while, right? These two little whiles. And if we go to Isaiah chapter 10, it also speaks about this. In verse 12, it says, "Wherefore it shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks." And in verse 25, it says, "For yet a very little while, and the indignation shall cease." So he punishes him at the end of the little while, right? And it's talking about this northern power, Assyria, coming up against Jerusalem. And once he's fulfilled that work, the Lord will punish him, right? At the end of the little while, okay? You can see the Bible explains itself. Again, if we go to Jeremiah 51, verse 33. "For thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing floor. It is time to thresh her. Yet a little while, and the time of her harvest shall come." So what's at the end of the little while? The harvest. Okay, so we saw in the other one, the tops of the ears of corn get chopped off. And now it says specifically, after a little while, Babylon's harvest will come, right? Right here, at the end of this little while. Babylon is going to get punished. Because why? It says, "Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicates. He has cast me out." So we know that this is where Nebuchadnezzar, the dragon, swallows you up in his belly, because the dragon was the whale, right? 3 days. And it says, for a little while he's going to do this, and then shall the harvest come, right? So we want to get to the point to show you that at the end of this little while, there is a harvest. At the end of this little while, there is a harvest, right? Very clear to see in Bible prophecy, but we can only do one thing at a time. But I'm just placing those things, right? So that, please mark it down, remember it, so that when we come to that point and lay these things on, it will all become very clear, right? Now go to Haggai chapter 2 and verse 6. Now this is speaking about this spiritual temple, right? Christ says, "Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up," speaking about his spiritual temple. And here in Haggai verse 6 it says, "For thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth." Now this is relevant to Matthew 24, right? Because remember, these false prophets are going to rise here. Let's just mark these, right? So you've got these false prophets, and they're rising there saying it's the end. But Christ says, when you get here, the end is not yet. Don't listen to these false prophets because they're going to deceive you. They say it's the day of the Lord, but it was not the day of the Lord, right? It's only the beginning of his judgments, right? So the four winds begin to blow, typifying 7 last plagues, but they're held in check so as not to prevent the work of the third angel. But these false prophets say, no, it's the end, right? It's not the end. Okay? And okay, trying to remember what my point was, but yes, because in Haggai 2 and verse 6 it says, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth. And this is what Sister White was referring to. This was the shaking of the earth, not the shaking of the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth would be shaken by the voice of God. And we will come to that, right? But what I was showing you, that at the destruction of Jerusalem, the heavens and the earth are shaken. At the destruction of Babylon, we will see very clearly that the heavens and the earth are shaken. Harvest, harvest. Heavens and the earth, heavens and the earth. Right? All through the Bible, this point, right? So these false prophets arise and say, now it's come, right? They're claiming Christ has come, but it's false. It's this false Christ that set himself up here and deceiving the whole world, right? We must not be deceived by this. So we must allow the Bible to explain these things. And when you go through the Bible and you bring all the things together and you put it all in its right place, which is not easy, right? Because when you see a symbol and a symbol, you tend to put them all together. But they mean the same thing, but they're not generally in the same place. So it sometimes takes time. It's taken us years to divide all these things, put this thing in its right place and that thing in its right place. And it means that we have to go through this. The Bible is like a huge jigsaw puzzle, especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? We have to rightly divide God's word and use the rest of the Bible to explain it. And this, I'm just explaining to you now the parts that we've come to understand. Okay, so let's go to this first quote, because we're going to look now at this time of peace. This is from 1 Testimonies 2:68. Now this quote, she writes in 1 Testimonies all about the war in the United States, the Civil War between the North and the South. And it was all about slavery, right? And she likens it unto God's people when they were in Egypt. Because when they were in Egypt, they were in slavery, right? So it's all speaking about the end of the world. So she likens this war between the North and the South in America to God's people being in Egypt in slavery. It parallels these two stories. And we're in slavery in this time of trouble, right? And this is why Pharaoh, which is Nebuchadnezzar, both the dragon, gets punished at the end, because he's the one that was bringing God's people into slavery, right? But in the war between the North and the South in the US, it shows that within Egypt, there's these two camps, right? There's these two ideologies and they're fighting, right? And they're trying to deceive everybody within Egypt, right? So the Egyptians are fighting against the Egyptians, right? Just on that point, just go to Isaiah 19. It says that very clearly, just so you can see this point. Isaiah 19 verse 1. It says, the burden of Egypt. Behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, right? Okay, kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation, right? This is what's always happening. This is this war between these two parties, right? So let's go to this quote, because this quote, she quotes it after speaking all about the whole, this testimony there that she's writing. She's writing about this war between the North and the South in the United States. And then she just mentions this. She's trying to teach a lesson about that history and then point to this. It says, I was shown the inhabitants of the earth in the utmost confusion, war, bloodshed, privation, want, famine, and pestilence were abroad in the land. That's the language of Matthew 24. As these things surrounded God's people, they began to press together and to cast aside their little difficulties. Self-dignity no longer controlled them. Deep humility took its place. Suffering, perplexity, and privation caused reason to resume its throne, and the passionate and unreasonable man became sane and acted with discretion and wisdom. Okay, so you can see that by this time of trouble, this is what brings God's people to be healed, right? By many stripes we are healed, it says, right? Christ was made perfect through suffering. This is the testimony, right? We must come out of the belly. The belly is a time of persecution. Okay? And then it says, my attention was then called from the scene. There seemed to be a little time of peace. Once more, the inhabitants of the earth were presented before me. And again, everything was in the utmost confusion. Strife, war, and bloodshed, with famine and pestilence raged everywhere. Other nations were engaged in this war and confusion. War caused famine, want and bloodshed caused pestilence, and then men's hearts failed them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. Now that's taken from Luke 21:20. So she's specifically marking a point, right? Now that verse there refers to here, right? So the point that I want us to, refers to here, this point actually, right? And what I want us to get is that this quote here perfectly fulfills these two little whiles, right? There are two times of trouble where these things have been acted out. Now these things begin here, wars and rumors of wars, right? But the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against kingdom. But these are just the beginning of sorrows. And then you're going to come here, right? And these two times leading down to the destruction of Jerusalem, and then this other little while leading down to the destruction of Babylon. Two harvests, right? And what I want us to understand is that quote there, because she quotes Luke 21, right? And Luke 21, that particular quote, which we'll come on to, we'll show this, is marking the beginning of this time of trouble here that's going forward, right? So it's at the end of this little time of peace. So now the whole Bible testimony in Daniel chapter 7, for instance, focuses on the fourth. This is this fourth kingdom. This comprises of pagan Rome and papal Rome. So, and that's what's been marked here. This is this fourth beast that was diverse from all the other beasts because it's made up of these two parts. And these two little whiles are referring to the work of this part and the work of that part, right? But remember, it's all one kingdom. These are just phases that it's going through. And this power and this power, these two kingdoms within that kingdom that are fighting against each other, right? So, and she's illustrating, and there are other lines that bring together that show this power is always fighting, right, at all these waymarks with this power. These powers are fighting all the way through, right? And this is what this war is she's referring to that's going on between them, right? But when we go to this next quote, this is the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the early 1900s, right, who lived just after the time period of the First World War, right, who had been searching the Bible, searching the spirit of prophecy to understand what had just taken place. Was the First World War marked there in Bible prophecy, right? And let's read what it says, right? She says, over 60 years ago, in referring to the recent European conflict, In a special testimony, Sister White said, I saw Europe just as things were moving to accomplish their desire. There would seemingly be a slackening up once or twice, thus the hearts of the wicked would be relieved and hardened. But the work would not settle down, only seem to, for the minds of kings and rulers were intent upon overthrowing each other, and the minds of the people to get the ascendancy. So she's speaking now, or they're speaking now. They're referring to her quotes that she wrote over 60 years ago, pointing forward to this First World War. Right, now let's read next paragraph. Probably because they're only taking, they're referring now to this quote we just read before, 1 Testimonies 2:68. There was this time of trouble, there seemed to be a little time of peace and time of trouble. So they've just had the First World War, and now there's a time of peace, right? And they're understanding that there's now going to come another war. And that obviously the Second World War came, right? So it says, probably to this little time of seeming peace, this statement in volume 1, page 268 refers. Now it doesn't, but they couldn't be blamed for thinking that because it's the same pattern, but I'll show you. It says, there seemed to be a little time of peace. This time of apparent peace is followed by the final world conflict, illustrated by the Second World War, right? Sister White, in referring to it, said, once more the inhabitants of the earth were presented before me, and again everything was in the utmost confusion. Strife, war, and bloodshed, with famine and pestilence raged everywhere. Then men's heart failed them for fear, and looking after those things which are coming on the earth. When peace was declared in Europe, men were still hopeful through a League of Nations, right? So at the end of the First World War, I won't mark it yet, they made a League of Nations, right? Which was a precursor to the United Nations, right? The United Nations, this power right here, right? Okay, it says, through a League of Nations to bring about the reign of peace. But as the final conflicts opens up, all hope is given up. Their hearts will then fail them for fear, right? So they saw the end of the First World War. They saw this League of Nations coming up to bring about world peace. But actually their peace that they were trying to bring about was all humanism. It was all in human strength, making this confederacies so that there would be no more war. And this is their agenda. Their agenda is to murder, biggest majority of the people in the world, keep it at a certain level, and that way there will only be peace here. But in order to have that peace, they've got to murder, 7/8 of the world's population, right? It's madness, right? It's absolute madness. These people, how they think. It says this short period between the two great world conflicts is providentially granted God's people to finish the task before them of carrying the last message of mercy to the people, and of warning them of the impending judgments and of the nearness of the end. It is at this time that the latter rain, or refreshing from the presence of the Lord, will come to give power to the loud voice of the third angel. As God's Spirit comes upon his churches, and each member becomes an active toiler, in a comparatively short time, it is possible for the task of warning the world and leading souls to Christ to be finished. Okay, so they're talking about you have a time of peace, right? What I want us to understand is that what I want us to understand here, this time of peace, they're saying here, right, at the end of the first conflict, there's a time of peace came, and it was a time where they would go forward under the power of the Spirit and finish the work. Now, Sister White has a quote where she says, what God's people failed to do in a time of peace, they will have to do in a time of terrible, troubling conflict, words to that effect, right? So actually, in the time of peace, they failed to do that work, which is a subject of Bible prophecy, because when the time of peace is when you come into the land. So God's people, They came out of Egypt, right? They got given the promised land, and then they got taken back into Babylon because they failed to do that work. They refused to do it, right? So the Lord brought them into captivity. So therefore, there would be people there that would be a light to the Babylonians, right? Subject of Bible prophecy. I hope I'm not rushing ahead. However, what I want you to see now, Millerite history, which we looked at, right? 1798, 1840, right? April 19th, 1844, down to October 22nd, 1844, right, is a period 46 years, right? No accident, right? So what I want us to see, right, is there's one time of trouble, a time of peace, followed by another time of trouble, right? And what I want us to see is that, for instance, the First World War from 1914 to 1918, 4 years, right? The Second World War was from 1939 to 1945, 6 years. Now, do you think that that's an accident, right? And the point I'm making, right? Here you have 4 years, and here you have 6 years. And the reason why I'm doing that, right? You have a time of peace in between them, right? Same as these two times of troubles. 46 years, right? Time of peace in the middle. And the point was laid out is when we went through this, there's wars and rumors of wars, and then nation shall rise against nation, there'll be famines and pestilences. And I was speaking about this power specifically. It's going to try and force this, this evil into everybody, right? And murder as many people as possible, okay, if you would receive it. When you understand the First World War, right, was a terrible conflict, right? And near the end of the First World War, there was this great pandemic came, right? 1917, this flu, I think it was bird flu, that came. It murdered millions. And at that time, if you go back and look in that history, there was a military immunization program that was forced upon the people, right? Remember, there's no new thing at the end of the world, right? But the question that I would ask, what's the difference between the First World War and the Second World War? Well, the Second World War, right, Mr. Hitler, right, who many say Donald Trump illustrates, right, or he has that mentality, right? We can come on to that, right? He fought in the First World War, but then when he came back in the Second World War, he rose to power here, right? And his sole intent was to murder the Jews because he blamed the Jews for what happened in the First World War, right? Now, if you just look here, right, you've got this northern power here who's going to get overruled by this southern power here, right? So when they come back to power here, because this is the north again coming back to power, they're going to blame, right, this God's people for all the problems, right? Just like Hitler blamed the Jews. They were just playing a role, right? And the Jews being murdered there under this time period was a fulfillment of the curse that they brought upon themselves when they said, let his blood be upon us. So when they stood at the cross and said, crucify him, let his blood be upon us, there was the fulfillment of that curse, right? And it's prefiguring the curse that's going to come upon God's people in this time period because they rejected the truth. They've rejected Christ. Okay? And in the Second World War, like 6 million Jews were put to death, right? And this is the difference, right? They didn't have those specific incidents in the First World War. And what I want you to see is this time of trouble, It's marking as a great tribulation, and we'll come to that at a moment, right? So this time of trouble will be far worse than this, and this is what Christ is saying. You're already sorrowful, and we will come to it in a moment, right? In a little while, you won't see me, and then in a little while, then you're going to see me again. He's marking out this terrible time of conflict that was going to come. So let's go back to the notes, okay? Because, go back to Matthew 24, verse 9, because verse 8 says, these are the beginning of sorrows, but now come to verse 9, it says, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, right? So now there's a change, right? Now they're going to put you to death. That's the difference. In the First World War, you know, there wasn't this mass extermination of a group of people, right? Just because he wanted to blame them for everything. But in the Second World War, there was these concentration camps murdering the Jews, right? And also anybody else that rose up and disagreed with them, right? But here, Jews typify God's people, right? In verse 9, then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake, and then shall many be offended. Okay, so when that time comes, many people who were once in the truth are going to become offended and shall betray one another and shall hate one another, because character is now going to be revealed, right? Character is always revealed in a crisis. Now, so it says that they shall deliver you up and kill you, and many shall be offended. So go to John 16, verse 1. Now, John 16, we already read. Christ was speaking about this little while here, right? So at the beginning here, this is just the verses prior to him talking about that. He says, these things have I spoken unto you, that you should not be offended. Okay, we just read that when they deliver you up to be afflicted, many shall be offended, right here. These things have I spoken unto you, that you should not be offended. They shall put you out the synagogues, yea, the time cometh that whosoever killeth you will think that he doeth God's service, because this is the northern power. This is this northern power that has this religious cloak on and believes what they're doing is right, okay? And these things they will do unto you, because they have not known the Father nor me. But these things have I told you, that when the time shall come, ye may remember that I told you of them. And these things I said not unto you at the beginning, because I was with you. But now I go my way to him that sent me. And none of you asketh me, whither goest thou? But because I have said these things unto you, sorrow hath filled your heart. So they're beginning to have this sorrow. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth, it is expedient for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter will not come unto you. But if I depart, I will send him unto you. So when Christ goes to the cross, he sends the Comforter. We looked at this. The cross marks pouring out of the Spirit, right? Teaching us these points. So when we go also to Matthew 13, verse 20, it says, but he that received the seed into stony places, the same is he that heareth the word, and anon with joy receiveth it. Yet he hath not root in himself, but dureth for a while. For when tribulation or persecution ariseth because of the word, by and by he's offended. So here it's speaking about the people that were in the truth, but when this tribulation comes, right, because they've not got root, they've not put this word in their heart, that they really have this faith that can stand through trial and persecution, they become offended. And it says when they become offended, they're going to hate their brethren and deliver them up, right? So your own brethren will turn on you. So go back to Matthew 24, verse 15. Now, okay. Did I miss? No? Okay. Matthew 24, verse 15. Now, what I want you to understand is Matthew 24, verse 15 is just bringing you back to this point. So what he does is he starts here in Matthew 24, verse 8, says, beginning of sorrows, then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, right? And it brings you all the way down to verse 14, right? Then shall the end come. And we'll come to that in a moment, right? So it brings you all the way down to the end, and then it just says in verse 15, when ye therefore, speaking about these points, right, shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand, right? Now that's speaking about Daniel chapter 11. So let's just turn there quickly, right? Daniel chapter 11 and verse 31, because Christ is pointing us to the book of Daniel, right? And it says, and arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Okay? So, Christ is taking his own word and marking what's happening at this point. Now, okay, we already marked this point, that this is 1260, right? And I've been speaking to you about these point about fractals, right? And this 1260, which is from 538 to 1798, just repeats, going all the way through here, right? But in history, right, Daniel 11:31 is speaking about that same history. So what I want you to see, right, is that Christ is making a fractal here, and you might not get this now, but it doesn't matter. You'll get it later. You'll get it at some point, but just mention it. Is that history? Christ is taking it and placing it there. And I also want you to see that he's going to take it and place it here. And the reasons why I'm just showing you this now, so there's no confusion, you can understand, these are these fractals. So you have time of tribulation, right, where God's people have been persecuted. And now it just illustrates it again. And now it illustrates it again. And these are these birth pangs, right? So when a woman is in travail, which begins here, right, these are the beginning of sorrow. So it's going to come here, then it's going to get worse. And this little times of peace. So when a woman is in travail, right, to bring forth her children, she has these pains, right, that they're not so bad. It starts off, the pains just a little bit, then the eases off, that's a time of peace. And then when the pain comes back, it comes back a little stronger, right? Not only that, it increases in speed, right? They come closer together, right? And this is what's been illustrated by these times of trouble, time of peace. It's these birth pangs as they're increasing and increasing all the way down to the child is born, right? Christ takes the natural things to teach us spiritual things. And these events are these times of trouble and times of peace that are being marked out there for us to see. So there's a whole bunch to understand from this, but I'm just laying things there so you can understand why I'm doing this, right? Or why the Bible is doing this, right? So Christ in Matthew 24 says, therefore, when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Now, you could make the argument, well, he's going right back to the beginning. No, he's not, right? And I can assure you he's not doing that. We've struggled with this also. Because once we understand Daniel 11, right? Daniel 11 is an illustration from here all the way down to here. All those verses illustrate all these events. And the only way we can understand Daniel 11 is from all these other things. And Daniel 11:31 is marking right here. Okay? So Christ is marking it himself, right? He's putting this in place for us, right? So when we go back to Matthew 24 verse 15, it says, When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Okay, and jump down to verse 21. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Right? So, I'm just going to mark it here, right? Great tribulation. Now, if we go to Mark 13, which is the parallel to Matthew 24, and let's see what it says here. Same verses. Mark 13, verse 14. But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Come down to verse 19. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created unto this time, neither shall be. So that great tribulation is a time of affliction. Now that's very important, right? Bible is explaining itself. So we just to bring these things together and let the Bible speak. Okay, so now go to Matthew 24, verse 11, right? So here we have verse 8, verse 9, going to deliver you up to be afflicted. And now verse 11, it says, and many false prophets shall rise and deceive many, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold, right? So remember we saw there's people in the truth, they're going to get offended here, and they're going to deliver up their brethren because their love is going to wax cold, right? Because many false prophets shall rise and deceive many. So at the beginning here, beginning of this 1260, we had many false prophets, right? Now we're here, same again, right? It says, false prophets shall arise and deceive many. So we're just building this pattern, right? False prophet. And I'll show you, in this one here, there's also false prophets arising. So we're just showing how this pattern is always repeating, right? But we'll put that in place when we come to it. Okay, last point I want to make today, because there's so many points to illustrate, but we can only do a little bit at a time, is in Matthew 24, verse 13, these last two verses that brings you down to the end. It says, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved, right? So when this great tribulation comes, great affliction, he that endures to the end, the same shall be saved. Now, I want you to see, right? No, I won't put it there. That's speaking about this time, right? Now let's read the next verse. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Right? There's two ends. Because remember, we marked this point that when you go to the cross, out of his belly flows rivers of living water, and it goes to the Gentiles. Right? So, first test for the church. Destruction of Jerusalem. Church finished. Out of the belly flows rivers of living water. It goes to the Gentiles. And that's what it says here in verse 14. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations. And then shall the end come. Because up until this point, it's dealing with the church. Right? Christ is speaking to his people saying, this is going to happen. The end is not yet. Then this is going to happen, right? These are just the beginning of sorrows, but then they're going to deliver you up, right? But those that endure to the end, the same shall be saved, and then the gospel goes out to the whole world, and then the end shall come, right? It's a pattern, okay? Now, I don't expect you to take my word for that, but I will give you many witnesses to prove this. But here's one that we're going to close on, is in verse 31. Matthew 24, verse 31, it says, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, And they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other, right? And I will show you that Matthew 24, it's marking this time where this sign comes here, and it's this gathering time from one end to the other end. There's these two ends that it's speaking about. So none of that could be understood through just reading it, right? You just read that and you could just apply your own thoughts, your own evil heart. And many people do it. They say, oh yeah, don't we see, look, there's wars out there. We can see that we're near the end. But this is not how Christ does things. He is very specific. And it must be the Bible explaining itself every time, right? We cannot put our own construction, for no prophecy of the scriptures of any private interpretation, right? So make note of all the points that I've put in place. Make note of the points that I've given evidences for and the ones that I've spoken about and I'm yet to give evidence for. And if I fail to do that, please remind me, right? But by God's grace, we will come through this and we will build, and we will show hands down that this structure is correct, right? And we will see how Daniel and Revelation, through all these prophecies, are bringing together the final events leading down to the close of probation. And on that thought, for today, we shall close. Okay, so let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you for this time that we could spend, but Lord, there's so much information here, so many things to think about. I pray that you give me wisdom, that I can do this in an order, that nothing would be overlooked, nothing forgotten about, that I would give more than 2 witnesses at least for each point that is being relayed, that we can see that it's the Bible that's explaining itself and not myself, and that we can prove all things and hold fast that which is good. Please help the brothers and sisters that are watching to go through these things for themselves, to think about them and to put things in place and wait and allow for other things to unfold. And I just pray, Lord, that you would give us time in order for these things to be relayed. And I thank you for your blessings, and I ask and pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.